he's made films on politics and that sort of thing, but he says, speaking about himself, he says his Christian faith is the foundation of everything he does. Like I say, he's an Indian immigrant. He came to this country when he was about 17. His family was a part of a Christian community in India that was the result of Portuguese missionaries that were there. So obviously it was Roman Catholic, but he doesn't identify himself with any particular denomination. What he does is he talks about Christianity, as Roman Catholic Christianity, mainline or liberal Christianity, evangelical Christianity, or just a form of Christianity, as he puts it, that basically all Christian groups accept as fundamental and as a part of their Christian faith. So he isn't pushing any particular denominational or theological point of view. What he's trying to do is speak to issues that people have specifically about Christianity, objections that people have in the modern world about Christianity, and he does so from this somewhat neutral point of view. Okay, but remembering that. Okay, so I think he's a little bit like C.S. Lewis. Some of you might remember C.S. Lewis. He wrote a popular and well-known book entitled Mere Christianity, which was not a book that was identified with any particular theological position like Lutheranism or Calvinism or Roman Catholicism. It was a book about the basics of the Christian faith. And so he's a little bit like C.S. Lewis in that sense. And this particular book falls into a category of books that are referred to as apologetics. Now, by apologetics, we don't mean that he's making apologies for being a Christian. That's not what it means. Apologetics actually goes way back to the 2nd century of the Christian era. And what it means is that it's a book that's intended to explain what Christianity is to people who are just curious about it. What is this religion? And of course, back in the 2nd century, that's why they wrote those kind of books. But what he's doing here is also engaging with a culture that is skeptical about Christianity. Okay, so he wants to engage and deal with what are considered to be some of the more basic objections to Christian faith. Some of those objections are come from the scientific community, that religion and science are opposite ends of the pole, that science is the road to truth and religion is, is something out of the past. So there's that issue, the issue of Christianity and science. He also addresses the issue of that people have about, how can you believe in a good God when there's such terrible suffering in the world? So he deals with that issue, and he deals with people who just plain think that the Bible is a book out of the Stone Age, and it's just plain out of date. So So that's what his intent is here. His intent is to explain the Christian faith, while at the same time engaging people and their specific issues about the Christian faith. So, so that's what it's about. Now, I personally only read this book recently, so it's not like I've got the whole thing stamped in my brain. So, so I'm going to learn along with you. But I did prepare a few remarks to get us started here. And I also picked the book partly because I thought it might be a book that people would find conducive to questions and discussion. So I want you to feel free to engage in discussion, or if you have a question at any time, to bring it up so that it's not just always me that's doing the talking. Okay, so if there's anything that you would like me to address vis-a-vis what he is saying here, I'm happy to do that. Okay, now probably one of the first things I ought to do is talk to you about his approach to the Bible. Okay, he is not a fundamentalist. Okay, fundamentalism, I don't know how much you guys know about fundamentalism or where it came from, but you know, fundamentalism is really a fairly recent phenomenon. At the turn of the century, around 1902 or 3, somewhere in there, who asked a number of people he thought was capable to write some Christian tracts, not books, but just small pamphlets entitled The Fundamentals of the Faith. And one of the fundamentals that came out of that movement was the idea that we have to take the Bible literally. If you don't take it literally, that meant to them that you were somehow questioning the authority of Scripture. I mean, either the Bible is true or it's not true. So they felt that you had to take it literally in order to acknowledge that what the Bible was saying was actually true. Well, as D'Souza points out, the problem with that position is that it does not recognize that there are different kinds of literature in the Bible, and not all of it is intended to be taken literally. He tells a story of an early church father who read a passage in the Gospels where Jesus says some people are made eunuchs for the kingdom of God. And unfortunately, he made himself a eunuch because he took that literally, you see, and it wasn't intended to be taken literally any more than, you know, at one point Jesus says, he's talking about sin, and he says, if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. Well, he's not, you know, that's hyperbole. That's not meant to be taken literally. And also there's short stories in the Bible, you know, stories that are not necessarily history, but stories that are meant to convey a particular message. So, so he's not a fundamentalist. He interprets the Bible basically the way you know, most people do, I think. You know, you number one, you need to understand what kind of literature you're dealing with when you read a particular passage in the Bible. Are you reading a poem, or are you reading something about the law, or are you reading out of the Gospels, or are you reading a letter? And that will determine, you know, how it is you understand what is being said in a large extent. And the other thing that's important to keep in mind is context, historical context. Uh, the time of the Bible was very different than our time. During our last class on the history of ancient Israel, we talked about, you know, what life was like way back then, what the society in Galilee was like. And it's important to understand some of the things that Jesus says. It's important to understand his context. Okay, so having said that, what we're dealing with here is a book that is intended to explain what basic Christianity is, and a book that is meant to address Christianity's critics, and to do so in an informed way, and that this is basic Christianity. This is not denominational Christianity. As long as you understand those things, I think that that is important to know about the book. Okay, so he starts out, the way he starts out is he talks about some recent developments. Now, by recent, okay, we're talking about a book that was written in 2007. So that's what he means by recent here. Some of this is basically old history at this point, but it's still relevant. Okay, it's still relevant. He points out that there has arisen a growing movement of people who identify themselves as atheists, but their atheism isn't just based on, you know, the idea that a person should have the right to believe in God or not. That isn't the issue. The issue is, does it make sense in the modern world to believe in God? Okay, now there's a group of people who wrote a number of books, very critical of Christianity, who don't think religion makes sense anymore. Books such as The End of Faith, which was a book written by a man named Sam Harris. Another book called The God Delusion, which was written by a man named Richard Dawkins. And another book entitled God is Not Great, written by a guy named Christopher Hitchens. Okay. Most of these guys, those latter two guys are from the UK. Harris is an American. Okay, now that from their point of view, they believe that Christianity, and indeed all religions, are basically on the way out. Okay, and the reason they think they're on the way out is because science has reached a point now where we understand ourselves and the world to the point where belief in a God or in demons and angels and all of the things that go along with whether it be Christianity or any other religion, that those sorts of beliefs, we don't need them anymore because we have science that can explain everything to us. And therefore, you know, religion is out of date. And their theory goes like this. If you look at the Western world right now, and you can get the statistics from him, Europe is basically almost entirely secular at this point. There are still some people who are involved in church in Europe, but not very many. Okay. And in fact, Václav Havel, you may remember him from Poland. He was the president of Poland. He made the remark that Europe is the first civilization in history that is atheistic. Now, when you get to the US, it's a little bit more complicated. There was a time that even within my lifetime, I mean, when I was growing up, Christianity was basically taken for granted. Of course, it's important to understand that I grew up in North Dakota, which is very different from California. But you know, Christianity basically formed the moral basis of society back when I was growing up. You know, things were closed on Sundays. Most everybody went to church. The 10 Commandments were posted on the classroom wall in your, you know, where you went to school. People took Christianity for granted. Well, that's not the case anymore. Okay. We all know that. So, so many of these so-called new atheists, this new atheistic movement, believes that the world has gotten to the point that it has matured through its ability to understand and you know, create technology and all of that, such that religion as an explanation of life is something that no longer applies, that religion is basically on the way out. But here's the problem. The problem is that if you take a look at what's happening in the Christian church globally, Christianity is actually growing. It's growing rapidly in places like China. There are some estimates that by the year 2050, China will have the most Christians in the entire world, that it will be basically the center of Christianity. It's growing in South and Central America, and it's growing in Africa. In some of those places, the number of Christians has more than doubled in the last several decades. Whereas in the US, I think at this point, it's something like 6 out of 10 people continue to identify as Christian, which is more than Europe, but it's still, you know, it's not the same as it used to be. In fact, our society now, you know, there was one guy, I forget his name. He was a scientist who had one of these programs on PBS a few years back, who made the statement that science deals with reason and fact, and religion deals with values. Okay. Well, a lot of people thought that made a lot of sense. Okay. And so they figured, okay, so society's becoming more secular. That is to say, you know, in our everyday lives, the way we make decisions, the way we live our lives on an everyday basis, we don't think a whole lot about God or about our faith. We just engage in our everyday activities and do our thing, and God doesn't really enter into it. In fact, we may wonder sometimes, where is God in the midst of all this? God is for Sunday mornings. Then, then on Sunday morning, we go to church and we hear the gospel and we belt out those hymns and we enjoy all that and we feel inspired. But then we go back into the world and it seems as if it's a world that doesn't have much to do with God anymore. And so according to D'Souza, he thinks Christians have made a kind of a compromise with the world in this respect. That they accepted this idea that religion is about values, and that's all it has to do with, and it's a private affair, and it's something that you keep to yourself, and you don't worry about beyond that. And that everyday life is secular. It's what we do in our everyday lives doesn't have a lot to do with our faith in God. So, for example, from a Lutheran point of view, one of Luther's main ideas was that a job is a vocation, and by vocation, of course, he meant a calling. The sense that you are called by God to serve your community in this particular way by being a nurse or a fireman or an electrician or a plumber or whatever it might be. Um, but now, people don't necessarily think about their faith when they decide, you know, what kind of career path they're going to choose, or they don't necessarily think about their job as a calling to serve the community that they have received from God. It's more a matter of a way of making a living. Okay, so that's what he means by secular. He means that we divide our life up between our religious life and the rest of life. When a full-blooded, as he puts it, a full-blooded Christianity understands that all of life is an expression of your Christian faith in one way or another. Not just our values, but our ethics, how we choose to live our lives, how we manage our money, how we understand our calling in life, whether or not we share our faith with other people. All of that, is a part of it. So basically, what he wants us to understand is that Christians today, especially what he calls the more liberal side of the church, has kind of made compromises with the world at large and has shrunk the role of faith in a person's life to being more a matter of going to church and worship services and involvement in the church, and when in fact being a Christian means that you are a disciple of Jesus Christ every day of your life, and that you understand your life in that way. Okay, so does that resonate with any of you? how do you feel about what he's saying there about Christianity and secular life today?
What, hey, Pastor, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
When you talk about values, your values are affected by your. I think Christianity affects your values, and so I'd like to argue maybe the opposite. That
Okay.
People do have something about values that would select their work, their line of work, and these values are driven by life, and so therefore all of these things about making choices,
Yeah.
indirectly, all come through your Christian beliefs, because they would affect your values directly.
Right. Well,
But
David,
maybe that's once removed.
I think that your values, I mean, you can go to the Ten Commandments and say, okay, those, I hold those as values and things. But when it comes to thinking about God, when I was starting my career during the Vietnam War, when they instituted the draft, at that point, my values were find some way that I don't end up slogging around in mud patties in Vietnam. And I went into the Air Force, and as a high schooler, I had figured out that I liked computer programming and stuff. In the Air Force, I found a job, fell into a job as a computer programmer, and it turned out into a pretty good career. Never gave a thought to what God was calling me to do. Today, living my life, I mean, I think about God in the morning. I think about him at meal times. I think about him at night when I'm getting ready to go to bed. And I know he's with me all through the day, but I don't feel that he's with me every moment of the day. I get to thinking about projects and shopping and what you need to do to live your life in modern society. And so what you were saying kind of resonates with me. I think everybody is different. There's a spectrum. What he's saying is not universally applicable. There are a lot of people that, and I've met a few, that feel the presence of God almost continually throughout the day. And, so it just, there's some element of truth in what he's saying, but it's not a universal truth for everybody.
Yeah. I think you're right, Hank. I think that's true. I think he's trying to describe a trend more than that it's trending, that people are trending more toward thinking about their religion as something entirely separate from the rest of their life. And certainly that's not true of everyone at all. But it probably is true to some degree for a lot of folks. And David, I think he would agree with you, David, in the sense that if you're saying that our values come from our faith, and that therefore when I make choices about work or ethical choices or anything, that in that sense my faith is involved in it. I think he would agree with you on that, if I heard you correctly.
Yeah, I think so. I'm sort of thinking of, dealt with, say, health workers lately. Having COVID and going through that, and you get, and you see it on TV and read about it. It's a group of committed people whose values are, some of them are derived from Christianity and some not. You find people that profess that their Christian faith, like for example in that industry, would be their Christian faith would lead them in that direction to help people. And
right.
can't think of
Right.
anything else but doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
For example.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, David, that so from my point of view, I think that some people are conscious of the fact that their values come from their Christian faith, and other people may have the same values and not be Christian, but they have those values precisely because the Christian faith is such an important force in forming Western culture. So
and creating those values themselves. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. So and we're gonna get to that point. There's a whole chapter on that in the book. So we're gonna get to that point a little further along. Before we're done for the day, what I'd like to do is I wanted to share with you some of the arguments that are made in these books that I cited earlier about the Christian faith being something that is now no longer relevant for people who live in the modern world because of our scientific worldview. And basically, most of these guys are what are known as evolutionary biologists, okay? And they identify themselves as Darwinists. Now, when you use the word Darwinist, you think of the theory of evolution, right? But they mean it in a more comprehensive sense than just the theory of evolution. Dinesh D'Souza has no problem with the theory of evolution. His issue is how some of these scientists, how far they take the theory. Okay, so what I thought I'd do is just describe in a nutshell how they think about human life, and that will give you a better idea of why it is they think religion is out of date. Okay, so it's been years now that the astronomers have understood that the universe that we live in had a beginning. Before the theory of the Big Bang came along, people, for the most part, believed what Aristotle said, that the universe was eternal. It's always been here. And it'll always be here, just the way it is now. It didn't have a beginning, and it's not going to have an end. Well, certain data came along that convinced people that, in fact, that is not the case. For example, when you look at the galaxies or the planets through a specific kind of microscope, you can see, or I mean telescope, you can see that the planets and the galaxies are moving very quickly away from one another, that the universe is expanding just like a balloon would expand as you blow it up. Okay, so that the stars and the galaxies are moving away from one another at a rapid rate. At one point, some people working for Bell Labs discovered this background radiation noise, or I forget exactly what they called it, that would have been left behind if there was some sort of giant explosion at the beginning of time and that after this so-called Big Bang or giant explosion, that over billions of years, through the force of gravity, that suns would form, and then planets around the suns and galaxies of stars and so forth and so on, that they would all begin to form and continue to expand away from each other. Okay, so astronomers are basically all agreed now that that is the theory that is pretty much accepted. That the universe indeed did have a beginning, and that it's, I don't know how many billions of years old, and that it's been forming and continues to form over time. Okay, now, one of those planets that formed was the one that we live on. And so about 3.5 billion years ago, because the conditions were right, in terms of, conditions that are necessary to support life, that somehow one-celled animals were formed. Now, there have been numerous experiments tried where people have tried to demonstrate that life can spontaneously arise if the conditions are right. Well, none of those experiments have been successful yet. But some people continue to believe that that's how life began, okay, billions of years ago. And that over time, life evolved. And the mechanism through which life evolves is very simple. Each life form reproduces more progeny than can survive. Okay, so then if you ask yourself the question, okay, so suppose a frog lays 100 eggs and they all hatch. How are you going to determine which ones will survive and which ones won't? Well, this is where Charles Darwin becomes important. He came up with a theory of the survival of the fittest. In other words, the life forms that are equipped to survive in the environment within which they're born will survive. Because in any given reproductive event, each one of the progeny of the species is going to have different characteristics. Some will be bigger than others. Some will be, have this characteristic or that characteristic. If you've got the right characteristics, you will survive. And this first occurred to him when he was on the Galapagos Islands. And he noticed that on the islands where the plant life was close to the ground, the turtles could eat the plant life without lifting their heads. So the shells over their necks were closed. But then there were turtles on other islands where the plant life was higher up, and they had to be able to lift their heads to eat. Well, he noticed that their shells, where the neck is, were curved upwards so that they could raise their heads up and get to the plant life so that they could eat and survive. Okay, so that got him to thinking that over time, right, the the progeny that survives, because they have the right characteristics, are the ones that will reproduce. And therefore, those characteristics will be carried on in the next generation, and so forth and so on. And then the next generation will have similarly different characteristics, and whichever generation has the ones that are more conducive to survival will be the ones that live to survive and reproduce. And so the theory of evolution really is based on the idea that the ones, the life forms that survive are the ones that are suited to the environment for survival, that are best suited to the environment for survival. Now, prior to Darwin, people looked at all the life forms on the earth, right? Whether it be crabs or frogs or mammals or whatever it might be, and it all looked like a perfectly designed universe, because every animal was designed to live perfectly within that environment. Okay, so if you go to a safari in Africa, that's where you find lions. Why? Well, because there's herds of wildebeest there, and the lions, you know, that's their food. If there weren't herds of wildebeest, the lion couldn't survive. So, the way these evolutionary biologists understand human beings is that we too are the product of evolution, okay? And that the characteristics of human beings, we have these characteristics precisely because in some way, shape, or form, they enabled our ancestors to better be able to survive the environment within which they lived, okay? So that over time, obviously, the eyes and the ears and the other parts of your body evolved because it gave you a advantage in terms of your ability to survive the threats to life that are out there in the world. All right, so if you combine this theory of the Big Bang, okay, that life started with this Big Bang, with the theory of evolution, these evolutionary biologists believe that we have all the tools we need and all the understanding we need to understand where human beings came from. We don't need, you know, we don't need the idea of a creator, because we can explain all the different life forms on the planet without the idea, excuse me, that they were created that way. We don't need a creator to explain the beginning, although nobody's been able to say why there was a Big Bang yet. But the underlying commitment of these particular scientists is that there has to be a naturalistic explanation for everything that there is in the world. And so they understand creation, all of reality, as a closed system of cause and effect. Everything that happens had a preceding cause, okay? And it can all be understood naturalistically without the intervention of a divine being or an angel or a devil or anything else that we can't see. All right, so from their point of view, basically, life arose spontaneously 3.5 billion years ago. It evolved over time, and here we are. And we live for a period of time, and then we die, and that's the end of it. Okay. So it's a worldview that doesn't allow for any ideas about that there's a higher meaning in life, that that we have a God who has who cares about us and who is present with us, and that we have a future beyond death and all of that. It's a completely different kind of worldview. And they think it's important for people in the Western world who are taught science to give up on their religious faith and just accept the fact that science now can explain where we came from and why we are the way we are. Okay, so yeah, and some of them have become quite militant about it. They believe that the school system should unlearn children the religious beliefs of their parents. That children should not. That one has called religious training child abuse, because he believes that you are abusing your child when you fill your child with ideas that are unprovable and that we don't need, that we've grown out of, okay, that we've matured out of, okay. So how do you respond to that particular point of view? How do you respond to that?
I personally keep wavering, and this is where doubt enters my mind, because I at times believe what they say there, that life arose spontaneously, we adapt, we live, we die, there's nothing more. In my periods of doubt, that's exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
But then there's always something that swings me back. So I spend most of the time on the side of God and faith, but I go there. I do. I go there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why I'm looking forward to this course.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
So I have a question, Dan. Well, what would motivate these atheists to proselytize atheism? Do they have a perceived higher motive to do that, or are they just reacting to Christian evangelists?
Okay, the answer is both and, David. Number one, they do have an animus toward Christianity in particular. And I don't know why they do, but they do. But the other reasons they give is that religion has caused nothing but problems for the human race. Okay, they think that religious extremism, and they cite the 9/11 attacks as being caused by religious extremism. They talk about the wars of religion that took place back in the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe, the Crusades, and they feel that religion causes all kinds of problems, that it divides people up. They blame the subjugation of women on religion. They blame, at least, and to some degree, they're correct, the idea that Europeans were somehow superior to other people was one of their excuses for slavery. Well, you know, you can't argue with that because they did believe that at the time.
Not to mention how you know, it was the divine right of European Americans to kick the Indians out of the country and round them up and herd them into little concentration camps. And,
right. All of that sort of thing. They tend to blame on the Christian faith. So that's the other reason why they're concerned that children should not be taught religion. That's their argument. We're going to get into these arguments. Okay, according to D'Souza, now he doesn't shy away from engaging these guys on their own territory. In fact, he points out how religion, and the Christian religion in particular, has led not to values like slavery, but rather that it was the Christian religion that enabled us eventually to see slavery as an evil rather than as a good. It was Christians who did that, not atheists. So, and when it comes to the values of a community that sees itself as responsible for caring for its underprivileged members, that is a Christian value. Okay, so he's going to argue that these scientists have got it wrong, that Christianity isn't the cause of these things. Christianity actually is the cure for these things. Okay, so that's where he's going with this, and that's where we'll go. We'll start getting in that direction next week. Okay, are there any other questions or comments?
I wasn't sure if you had a specific, if there was a specific chapter or bunch of chapters that we should be reading to prepare for each class.
Yeah, we're going to be starting on chapter, let me see here. Yeah, we're going to be starting on chapter 5 next time. Okay. Render unto Caesar the spiritual basis of limited government. Yeah.
You can get a copy, a free copy, a PDF copy online and download it right to your computer and read it right off your computer. I found one just by searching for that title, What's So Great About Christianity? And I was reading each of the links, and there was a free PDF. So I'm actually looking at the book as we talk, which is nice.
Oh, thanks for pointing that out, Sharon. Yeah, that's great. Great. Okay. Okay, well, thanks for joining me, everybody. I hope you'll hang in there, and we'll keep going next week, same time, same place.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Pastor Dan.
You're welcome. Okay, bye-bye.